Have you ever called somebody racist? Or has somebody ever called you racist? Have you ever asked yourself, am I racist? What about, does racism even exist? I'm sure a lot of these conversations are happening right now, considering what's going on in our nation. In this video, I'm gonna give you 2 key points to fully help you understand what racism is and looking at it from a different perspective. If you stick around in this video, I can guarantee you by the end of it, you won't have to wonder no more. So let's get it.
Look, never been a fake or a phony. I was on my own by my lonely. Yeah.
What up, YouTube? It's your boy, the man, the myth, the legend, Eddie Grant, and you are watching Vantage Point. If at any time you're watching this video, you're like, man, this dude is saying some hot stuff. Hey, don't be afraid to push that little thumbs up and like it. And if you're like, man, this dude, I'm really feeling this dude. I mean, he's good on the eyes, you know, he's really saying some hot stuff. I would love to hear more. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Click the little bell so you can get notified whenever I upload any videos. And if you want to know what the heck Vantage Point is and more about that, stay tuned, because in the next week or so, I will be officially launching my Vantage Point introduction video. I'm super excited about that. Probably should have did it a while ago, but I'm a perfectionist sometimes, and I just gotta fight with that. So now that we got all that out the way, let's get into this content. Racism. Before we move forward, there's something I like to do personally. I feel like we need to get some working definitions. A lot of times people are having conversations about topics like racism, but they have different beliefs on what that actually means. And so when they're having their conversations, one person's thinking one thing, another person's thinking another, and you're never gonna get to any kind of resolution unless you are thinking at least from the same perspective of the definition or what you're talking about. So for this particular video, my Vantage Point, this conversation, I am going to define racism like this. This one isn't my personal definition that I frequently use. However, I figured I would just do what a lot of people do. They go on Google and type in the word and what the meaning is. So that's what I did. This is your hot off the press Google definition of racism. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Key thing I want you to focus on with this definition is the bottom part. Based on belief that one's own race is superior. Belief, keyword belief. The second thing about this word that I want to point out is the ending, ism, the suffix ism. That ism has a meaning of its own that gives you a better perspective on how you're to look at the word. The definition of ism is a suffix added to the end of a word to indicate that the word represents a specific practice, system, hint, hint, or philosophy. So when looking at the word racism, you have racism, which is the belief that one's race is superior than another. And then you look at ism, that indicates that that word has to deal with a system. This brings me to my first point in fully understanding racism, and that is racism is a system. This is super important because so many people look at racism from an individual perspective. I didn't do that. I don't feel this way. I love people of different cultures. I eat different foods. You cannot talk about a system looking at things from an individual perspective. If we're gonna understand racism, we have to shift our mind to think outside of our own individual interactions and look from a system. The second key component that I have for fully understanding racism is that racism is a mindset. It is the belief that one's race is superior. We have belief, which is the mindset, versus action, which is what people see happening. You see somebody call somebody the N-word. I didn't do that, so therefore my action does not make me racist. Versus the belief, why did that person call somebody an N-word? Where did this mindset come from? To fully understand the mindset, we gotta go to where it started. There's a famous quote by Harriet Tubman that explains mindset and what I mean. Harriet Tubman said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if they only knew they were slaves." How does a slave not know they're a slave? The mindset. the belief that they aren't superior, but that they are inferior based on the system that was created. The last couple of years, I actually taught a little bit of middle school social studies, and I asked my class a particular question. And it sounds like a dumb question, and they looked at me like I was dumb, but I wanted to hear their answer. So I asked them, is slavery an example of racism? They all looked at me, again, like I was stupid. Of course, yeah, it is. Yeah. But I told them, no, it's not. Now calm down. Please don't give me the Candace Owens treatment. That's not where I'm going with this. It's mostly semantics, but just hear what I'm saying, because the way I'm presenting this gives you a different view, or a way to look at racism so you can understand it better. So chill out. Let me explain first before I start tripping. And at the end of it, if you still think I'm tripping, then you can let me know. But this is my perspective. Again, let me finish. I believe that slavery is able to happen because a system of racism was created. And so that system of racism enables something like slavery to take place. Let me explain. In order for people to be okay with treating people the way that slaves were treated, you have to convince them that they're not even people. That's why black people were dehumanized to the point that they were even considered in the Constitution as 3/5 of a person. So because you can make a society to believe that black people are inferior, they are not human, you're also telling white people that they are superior, that they deserve this, that they are supposed to have this authority over them. That's racism. Instituting that systemic belief that you have white people who are superior and these black slaves who are not even human, they're inferior. And when you set that system in motion, racism, now you can bring something like slavery in, and people not only go along with it, they fight for it. They believe it's natural, what it's supposed to be like, because of what the beliefs they had just been taught, the system of racism they had just been taught. And so that's what I mean by slavery is not an example of racism, but the system of racism that was created is what makes slavery something that was okay. Why is this important? Because a lot of people will say stuff like, slavery is over. We don't have racism. If you think that slavery is racism when you take slavery away, now racism is gone. But it ain't gone. So why is it still here? Because you might have took slavery away, but that didn't change the mindsets. That didn't change how people felt. People for close to 300 years were taught to believe that white people in this nation are superior and black people are not even human. So you have the 13th Amendment that comes and frees the slaves, but it doesn't free people's mindset. How do you know? Well, let's look through history and you'll see this common trend where law will be passed granting slaves freedoms and then people rejecting those laws. Well, right after slaves was free, you got close to 5 million black slaves who are just like, hey, go be free. You don't have education, you don't have money, you don't have land, you don't have anything. And on top of that, you have a mindset of inferiority and going into a place that's owned by people that have a mindset that you're inferior and that they're superior. What are black codes? Black codes were strict local and state laws that detailed when, where, and how formerly enslaved people could work, and for how much compensation. The codes appeared throughout the South as a legal way to put black citizens into indentured servitude, to take voting rights away, to control where they lived and how they traveled, and to seize children for labor purposes. Black codes were basically the roots of Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. Named after a black minstrel show character, the laws, which existed for about 100 years, from the post-Civil War era until 1968, were meant to marginalize African Americans by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, or other opportunities. Those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often face arrests, fines, jail sentences, violence, and death. So to counter the black codes, they released the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment was to ensure equal protection to all citizens under the Constitution. However, in 1896, a court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a separate but equal law that made segregation legal. And this whole idea of as long as the conditions were relatively equal is subjective. And to a bunch of people whose mindset is that white people are superior and black people are inferior, and they believe that they're not even human, and they believe that they should be enslaved, the conditions that they considered reasonable were not reasonable at all. But to them, they're like, hey, they're not slaves. They should be feeling happy about this. And this segregation went on for almost 100 years. Again, this is after slavery. So for 100 years, you have blacks being denied equal opportunities, equal rights, and it was legal. That 100 years gets us to 1964, where the Civil Rights Act is passed. 1964. Now, I just fast forwarded it to 1964, but in between that was so much of the struggle. I can't get into all of it, but I strongly encourage go back and look at the history and what's going on between that time of when Plessy versus Ferguson all the way to the Civil Rights Act being passed in 1964. The struggle that was going on. And not so much of what the struggle was, but take a look at the mindset that's still there. You don't belong. You don't deserve what we have. It's the mindset. It's the same system of racism that white people are superior and black people are inferior. A couple key dates and events I want to point out from that 100 years that went by. 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court basically ends segregation for public schools. Here we go again with changing something by law, but it doesn't change the mindsets. People were so angry because they did not want black people around their kids or around them. They were these bad people. They were low. They were less than. They should not be with us. We're superior. That 1960, 6 years later, we have this. Does anyone know who this is? Does this look familiar? This little girl is 6-year-old Ruby Bridges from William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans, 1960. She's in first grade, and she's the only black child enrolled in her school. Again, 6 years later. It was law, but 6 years later, she's the first black girl of her school. She had to be escorted. A 6-year-old kid had to be escorted by U.S. Marshals with her parents. Her parents not in this picture, but her parents were there too. Why? Because parents, grown people, were yelling at her, threatening, throwing things, spitting at her, furious because they didn't want her at the school with her kids. Adults, grown people, yelling at a first grader, 6 years old. Mindset. And this was 1960. That is only 60 years ago. Everybody knows somebody that's 60. 60 years ago, they were doing this to a 6-year-old. This is her now, standing next to a cutout of her 6-year-old self. She is currently 65 years old. The reason why I wanted to show this picture is because that's her today. It's one thing to talk about something happening during slavery, but this person, what happened to her, happened to where she's alive right now and well. 65 years old. That's how close this is. So in comes the 1970s, and over the next years from the 1970s to now, we got mass incarceration, war on drugs, white flight, gentrification, and I'm missing a whole bunch of stuff, but just for the sake of time, you still have all of these policies showing the residue of what happened at the beginning. The system of racism, the system that was created to make the society believe that white people are superior and black people are inferior. And all you just see over the course of this history is that happening over and over and over, where one thing will be removed, a law will be passed, but then it will just show up another way. And that's what we have today in 2020. We have laws that are being passed, but mindsets that are still the same. And because mindsets are still the same, this cycle just keeps repeating over and over and over and over. And just like it didn't stop with slavery, just like it didn't stop with Jim Crow, it hasn't stopped now. I say all that to say this. Racism is alive and well. It has not gone anywhere. But we have to change how we look at it. Racism is a system, and racism is a mindset. It is a system created with the belief that one race, in our nation is white people, is superior than black people. The reason why I propose to look at racism in this way is because we are not saying that you individually hate black people or Latino people or whatever. We are not individually saying that you believe you're better than. But if you live in a society and in a system that promotes this and you are unaware of it, you become part of the problem. How? Because you'll either be silent because you don't see anything, which is dangerous, or you will be adamant about telling people that it doesn't exist, which is dangerous as well. The only way that this system can change is for people to first understand that it actually exists. You can never understand or recognize that it exists if you are looking at it from an individual place and not looking at it from a systemic place. If you can hear that I'm talking about the system and not you personally, then that offense doesn't have to happen, and then you can hear and empathize with where I'm coming from, and now you are going to be a part of the solution as opposed to feeling attacked, and that makes you not want to have anything to do with it. The more people that we can come together to understand this system, the greater our chances are for actually overcoming the system. It takes numbers, it takes people coming together, like-minded, understanding what's happening. And if you're somebody who don't understand, more times than not, you're going to be offended and you're just going to go the other way. So I'm imploring everyone, don't run away. Listen, this is not a personal attack on you. It is an attack on a system. It is your job, my job, all of our jobs to find out where we fit in this system and how are we making this system work. Once you find out your role that you play in this system, now you know what role it takes for you to help fix the system. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You find out what it is. But you'll never know if you don't take the time to figure out how you contribute. Because in this system, you are either fighting against it, fighting for it, or not doing nothing. And if you ain't doing nothing, you just helping the system move along. A lot of times people feel like there's safety in silence, but silence is deadly. You have a role to play in righting this wrong. And again, I can't tell you what it is, but it's something. And if you're doing nothing, then you are doing something. You're making it stay the way that it is. So, like we said at the beginning, am I racist? That's not the question I want to ask. The real question is, do I support racism? What do I mean by that? I might not feel like I'm superior. I might not feel like black people are inferior. However, I do live in a society that does have those beliefs, but am I doing something to fix it, or am I doing nothing? And if you're doing nothing, then you support a system of racism. So, do you support racism, or are you against racism? There is no in between. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, this is my vantage point. This is my perspective. I would love to hear what you have to say. Feel free to leave some comments down below. Maybe we can get some good dialogue going back and forth on there. Again, I'm not the person to say that I'm the expert. This is just my opinion based on my education and my experiences. So hope you like it. I would love your feedback again. Love to hear what you have to say. Until next time, it's the man, the myth, the legend, Eddie Grant. We about this motherfucker. Y'all thought I was gonna say that, didn't y'all? Didn't y'all? Not this time.
Never been a fake or a phony. I was on my own by my lonely. Yeah. Look.